part three of the Neurips discussion. I'm going to focus on actually a little bit of a rehash of an already discussed topic, and that is state space models. And the reason is because actually Nathan Lambert just published his first interview in his new Interconnect podcast, which I'm really excited about. And he interviewed Tree Dow and Michael Poli, two people that are instrumental on this particular topic. I discussed it in the context of Chris Ray's presentation and Sasha Rush's comments on whether attention is all we really need, or if we can actually go beyond that. And fundamentally, the idea is, okay, look, state space models are things like RNN or CNN or anything where you have a sort of a linear processing of data, and you have some sort of filter that helps you make sense from input data and make some sort of conclusion or some sort of prediction or something useful with it. And in attention, you can do that. And at the extreme, attention is nothing but a state space model, but it's a flexible state space which can go up in size as needed. And that increases the compute and memory budget. And so the question is, can we do better? And can we, in particular, when we go to extreme, let's say, input lengths like audio or genomics, like Michael Poli says in this interview, we might not be able to do attention anymore. So we have to think about new ideas. And these two guys, they work with Together.ai, which is a startup where people like Percy Liang and Chris Ray are involved, and Tree Dow. So it's, I don't know if it's a Stanford spin-off really, but lots of Stanford people are there, and that's really exciting. What they're trying to do is democratize large language models, and this is one of the ways they're trying to do this, which is, lower the cost, lower the compute, lower the memory budget. I think this work is really interesting. Every time model architecture is at the forefront of something, that means that something is really happening, right? If you change the architecture of a car like Tesla did with the Cybertruck, that means something's happening in the automotive industry. New materials are being discovered, new modes of performance are being achieved, new experiences are being achieved, hopefully new price points, at least relative to performance, which already is the case anyway. So you have you have new architectures of software, we have new architectures of AI design for cars. So a lot of things are happening, and the same applies to architectures in the semiconductor space. We had the change in architectures from CPU and x86 towards GPU and CUDA, and this is where we are today. And the reason that happened is because we had a revolution in AI driven by ImageNet, and now we have a new revolution driven by large language models, which asks for a new architecture in state space models. In a nutshell, this is my interpretation of this interview, and I really apologize if I'm wrong on certain things, and I'm happy to discuss those mistakes in the comments. But this is my interpretation of this interview. So we have two people who are at the forefront of state space models. The reason I'm bringing this back, because I discussed this already in the sort of Chris Ray presentation episode, which was part one of my Neurips conversation. It really drew my attention, which is a good thing. I think from my perspective, I was able to really grasp what people like Nathan Lambert seem to find interesting also, and I think that's a good thing. Now, the second conversation in this particular episode is going to be a presentation by a bunch of people from UW, and the paper that I'm presenting is called DATACOMP, a testbed for dataset experiment. And the idea here, I think, is really, really interesting. And the reason I'm bringing this paper in here is because at the end of the interview, Tree actually says his main work is on data. And the fundamental idea here is that we have to spend more time thinking of what kind of data what kind of data sets we're collecting, what kind of data sets we're filtering, and what kind of data sets we're feeding into the models. And this is what DATACOMP is supposed to accomplish. It's just a sort of the idea here is to break the central dogma of machine learning, which is data, model architecture, algorithm, right? You have data, which is a monolith, and then you feed that into an architecture which somehow turns into an algorithm. So, for example, the architecture, the transformer architecture, has various algorithms that are being used that can take advantage of that architecture. And we're playing around with that a lot. I mean, this perfect example is the first part of this episode where Tri Dao and Michael and other people are working on making that more efficient, using attention maybe in certain ways. And then when the sequences get very long, use more state-space model inspiration. So we're working around architectures. We're working around algorithms. So once we decide, let's say, to use maybe something like an RNN, then we think about, okay, how can we do that more efficiently? All of that. What DATACOMP is doing is flipping this around and saying, how about we keep the architecture or the algorithm fixed, and we play around with the data, and we see what we can actually squeeze out of these architectures just by changing the data. And I think that's really exciting. This is not even on podcast. It's December 21st, 2023. This is Krim Delco. 4-day fund is up 6.7%. The market's up 1.1%. For the year, we're up 122.6%. The market is up 23.8%. We're outperforming by 98.8%. So the first part of this episode is an interview that Nathan Lambert did with two people from Together AI. A few words about Together AI. It's a startup that focuses on basically think of it like a cloud-based large language model / AI infrastructure company. Like, it gives you access to training. It helps you train on existing models. It helps you train your model, and it helps you do inference on your model. It helps you to do inference on existing models. It helps you integrate that into, of course, your data stack. And one of the things that Tree said in the end of the interview is that he's really focusing on that, actually. Meaning, okay, what kind of data, let's say you're a company, you're Tesla or you're whoever, and you want to use large language models for your own purposes, whether it's traffic management, traffic prediction, or whether it's enterprise data stuff or sales prediction or whatever it may be. The question is, what kind of data should we be using? So that's kind of what Together AI is doing, but this is not about Together AI. This is really about this particular topic. And the topic is, think about it this way. Are we going beyond attention? Are there more efficient ways to approximate attention and avoid the quadratic increase of compute and particularly memory budget with sequence length? So if we have a prompt, the typical prompt, write me a poem in the nature of Shakespeare, that's not terribly difficult. And the reason we have things like train of thought and chain of thought and in context learning and things along those lines, or in context inference, is because we have these sequence length limits, right? So we need to slice it up, and this is, of course, a good technique. And I'm going to talk about this actually in one of the other discussion parts. That was a big part of Neurips. But what if we have a very long sequence length, for example, audio or genomics, when the sequence is just it is long and there's nothing we can do, and we can't splice it up? That's the problem. Okay, we can really splice up, Honky Tonk Woman, Yesterday, or whatever song you want to choose, or we can't splice up Beethoven's Fifth and then still have the model understand what we're actually prompting. So with long sequences, and audio has very long sequences, that's just by nature of the data, we're getting into quadratic explosion of memory budget. So there's maybe better ways to do this, and that's what this interview is about. And I spoke about this, already with the Cre3 presentation that I presented in my first part of the Neurips conversation. So, in other words, this is a big deal. This is interesting. The reason this is interesting is because if you can find more efficient, more compute efficient ways to incorporate larger sequences and get better or even the same type of results as you get with attention, then your possibilities increase, your costs come down, your flexibility goes up. This is what we at Orange Capital Partners look for. That's why I think it's important to understand the purpose of this podcast here is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. Now, we at Orange Capital Partners, we look for fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. And this is a perfect example of what we're talking about here. These are some mathematical ideas, some technological implementations of those mathematical ideas that could fundamentally increase flexibility, lower cost, and make just things better for less. That's what disruption is all about. This is what we're talking about. That's why we liked. That's why we chose Cre3's presentation as the first of our discussion. Neurips, in our point of view, this is the most important part of the whole conference for us. And I think it's important to understand also where we're coming from, right? What we're doing here in this podcast and in the work we're doing in Orange Capital Partners, it's not where we claim that we understand what's the most important thing. By no means. What our job is to find what's most important for us, for our purpose, the data that we need to feed our algorithm so we get the predictions that we want that work for us. They're different for different people. I think we might even not. It's very possible that we're not even going to discuss the best paper awards. I've been working on this. I've been preparing for Neurips a couple of days before the conference. I've been there for a full week, and now it's almost a week after, and I still don't know what the best paper awards were in Neurips. I will look at it at some point, but my point here is I am focused on the data that works for me, which is going to be a very big discussion in the second part of this episode. But let's get back to meaning the quality of data and the type of data that works for different types of models. This applies to artificial intelligence as much as to human intelligence, as much as to a business like ours. So back to, we're very happy that Nathan did this interview because it validates a little bit also our own emphasis of this subject. Now, just to finish the conversation here, this is not a technical podcast, so I'm not going to discuss too much about what actually is going on, but just think about it this way. Michael said it really nicely. You could think of attention is just another state space model, but the state space is flexibly expandable with input space. And that's the beauty, and that's why it works so well. Now, if you fix that state space, whether it's through recurrent neural networks, where you have a sort of a hidden layer which is fixed and is sequential, which is really good, so you can you have some advantages here in terms of computation and architecture, or whether you do it through convolution, which is you apply a filter to your input data, and then you hopefully get something out of it that is as good as if you use an attention. It's conceptually the same thing, but if you limit the state space, you're going to have a cost. You're going to have to pay a cost. And Nathan asked the question: how does something that doesn't use attention get around the fact that you don't look at all the history of the text in your input? That's the key question. And the answer is we can use recurrent neural nets, convolutional neural nets. We can use ideas from those and find mathematical workarounds that still preserve the information. The Mamba model is such a model, Striped hyena is another one. Both were, made some waves recently. Striped hyena is a hybrid between RNN and transformers. Think about it this way: maybe you can use, if you take attention and you have the key vector and the value vector multiplications, and then the query multiplications. Those are dot product multiplications, matrix dot product multiplications that become pretty complex. Maybe you can lower the dimensionality of those before you do the final dot product multiplication and still preserve the information. So this could be one. And then there's things like, diagonalization of matrices, deep linear algebra, very interesting stuff. It's not surprising that this work comes from Chris Rees' lab, amongst others, which is an electrical engineering lab. This is signal processing. This is just plain old engineering, actually. And probably people at Bell Labs probably might be reading and listening to this and thinking, we've been doing this in the 60s and 70s. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that it's being reapplied to something very new, which is very powerful. Again, maybe a good summary also offered by Michael, which I really liked, is what is this idea, this whole idea of using state-space models or making attention more efficient? One, there's three approaches that, one is, so you want to reduce the complexity of the dot product multiplication of the matrix, and you can do that by lower dimensionality of vectors before you do the massive dot product multiplication in the attention sort of architecture. One is gating. Gating is, think of it like, make the limited state space available more efficiently by gating. Gating is learnable control of how input variables get processed with states and what states to focus on. And lastly, convolutions, or in other words, to simplify, just filters that filter input data in a way that makes more sense, or at least the same sense, but in a lot less computational budget, a lot less computational budget. Finally, I just want to mention again what Tree said, which I found really interesting, which is his focus on data. He was asked, okay, what are you working on now? What are the big ideas? And he said, I am actually working on data. And I'm going to discuss what that means a little bit in the next part of this episode, which is DATACOMP. But before I go there, just what this really goes down is it goes back to Andrew Ng, 2014, when I met him, and he spoke about this many times. Data is the new oil, and it became kind of a buzzword that I think today nobody wants to use. But I am actually rediscovering this buzzword, and the reason I discovered it is because the same way we have to go look for oil, we have to go look for data. Finding the right data is paramount in developing good models, because you can have bad data and a good model and you get bad results, and you can have good data and a good model and you have good results. And that this is really key. And I think a lot of people don't think like that. Now, Tree Dow and Michael Poli and people like that, they're at the front of this. PhDs from Stanford in AI. It doesn't get much better than that. But most of the AI community doesn't even think like that. That's why I discussed also, I think what Kilcher and his friends did with open assistant stuff is amazing. It's because it is about data, and data is going to be the key. And I think those PhD types from these top universities, look, there's a reason why they ended up where they ended up. I mean, they really are at the forefront of this field, and it's key. So data is key, and thinking about what kind of data, or most importantly, also how to filter data, right? We have so much information out there, but we need to filter that stuff somehow to get the best results out. So I think that this idea that data is the new oil, I think Andrew Ng, there was a lot more depth to that than maybe he even thought himself, or he wasn't able to explain it. I don't know, but because it's about the search for the data. It's about mining the right data. It's about really figuring out what kind of, very similar idea. Like we know the oil's there. You give me a price, I'll give you the oil, but go find it. Go find the right oil at the right connection. The complexity and all of that. So oil, looking for data, same thing. So what's DATACOMP? DATACOMP is a project out of UW. It's one of the orals at Neurips and caught my attention. The paper in search of next generation of multimodal data sets. So what they say here is typically the sort of central dogma in machine learning is data, model architecture, algorithm. And model architecture and algorithm are being experimented on, but data isn't. How about we do it the other way around? We fix model architecture and algorithm and we experiment on data. Let's see where that gets us. And the idea is to more carefully think about the data selection. In particular, it is what data sources should we train on and how should we filter them. Now the paper goes through some details about clip score and results. To me, that's not the key. I think this is a beginning. This paper is more of a inspirational idea than a research project that will actually end up making waves. But it's a beginning. It's a starting point. And I made an interesting note. Quality is a big data problem, and I think pun intended here, right? It's a big data problem. It's a big problem for data. Quality is the key. And this is one of the ways, we could experiment about that. We can keep the models, how about we keep the models fixed and we iterate around the data? So I thought that was really beautiful. And one interesting finding from the paper is, and I spoke with Samir, one of the authors, is that you take, let's say, a pool of data and you train a given model with the whole pool of data, and then you train the same, you use the same model with less data, but you filter it carefully and you get better results. And this is one of the key findings that I think reiterates the point that having a good filter, so first, what data should be used and then how should we filter that data, having less can actually improve your performance. So to summarize this episode, it's part 3 of the Neurips conversation. 2 discussions. One is interview Nathan Lambert in his first Interconnect podcast, talks to Tri Dao and Michael Poli about their approach towards finding more efficient ways to either augment or circumvent attention architectures, make them computationally more efficient, in particular state space models, CNNs, RNNs, finding mathematical workarounds to limit the state space but still keep the memory and the information and the representation intact. And DATACOMP, a paper that was presented at Neurips that brings forward the idea of experimenting around data, the question, what data should we train on, and also how should we filter that data and keep the model and the algorithms fixed. In other words, experiment around the data and keep model and algorithm fixed, versus the usual central dogma of ML is data is fixed and model architecture and algorithm are being experimented on. Thank you.